Hi, Dan here, and today I'm going to be showing you some of my favorite pedal hacks. Okay, my first tip is what I call my TRS Battery Check. So one of the frustrating things if you're using pedals that got batteries in is knowing how much voltage you have left in the battery. Generally, you've got to take the back off, take the battery out, get your meter and measure across it. And if that's on the board, it can be time consuming and frustrating. Right, there is a much simpler, easier way to do it. And we can do this because of this connector inside the pedal. Now this is called a TRS socket or a tip ring sleeve socket. So you can see we've got our three connectors on here. And if we look at a TRS connector, you can see that we have a tip, we have a ring and the sleeve, okay, or the earth. So as I plug the connector into the socket, these little tabs here are now resting on this part of the connector. When we plug our guitar in, we use this cable, mono cable, and it only has a tip and a sleeve, or the earth. So this is a trick that pedal designers have been using for a long time, and it's really clever. Basically, they use the center terminal, the ring terminal, to put the battery, to connect the battery to the circuit. And then they connect the shield side, the sleeve side, to the negative side of the circuit. So what happens is, with my mono connector, as I plug this in, the tip is connected to the tip, but the ring and the sleeve are shorted together. And that is what connects the battery to the circuit. So that's why you might see, on some pedals, when you pull the jack out, that it's no longer powered, you plug it in and suddenly you have power, right? So this makes checking our battery really simple. All we do is we use a TRS connector. Instead of having to take the back off the battery and take the battery out, plug your TRS connector into the input. And now we can measure the voltage across the ring and the sleeve to see how much potential we have left in our battery. Okay, next we have a really simple solve for anyone trying to stick their Boss pedal to their pedal board. One of the pet peeves that people have with these pedals is the rubber base underneath, okay? Getting Velcro to stick to this can be really challenging. Getting anything to stick to rubber is really challenging. So there's a really easy solve for this. All we do is we take the back off the pedal and we turn it over and we connect it back to the pedal with the screws, and there we have a perfect flat base to connect our Velcro. Now, a couple of things. This doesn't work for every Boss pedal. Sometimes there's just not enough room under here to get the rubber to fit all the way. The other thing is when you open the case, you'll find basically a little piece of plastic like this. Now this is insulation. That's to make sure that the circuit board here doesn't touch any of the metal. Now generally this isn't an issue, however some of the Boss stickers here are foil type stickers and can be conductive. So make sure you leave that bit of plastic in, that's really important, just to make sure you don't get any short circuits on the circuit board. Yeah, but then it's just a matter of putting the base on, screwing that down together, and there is your perfectly flat surface to connect your Velcro. So I've been digging into my old Eventide Time Factor again. I'm really enjoying it. It's a really great sounding pedal, as long as you give it a parallel dry through, which I do in my wetter box. But the sound of the delays in here I'm really enjoying. And it's what we call a true stereo pedal. So we have stereo ins, like two inputs, and two outputs, stereo outs. And that means that we basically have two delay engines running in parallel that will take a separate feed. So it might come, you might have a stereo modulation going into the delay, and so the left and right, and then you have two separate delay lines and then two separate outputs, okay? So yeah, two separate delays running in parallel. Now most of us don't use stereo, okay? I run wet dry, but I very rarely run stereo, okay? But there is a way that we can use it. And it's just what I call my little stereo hack. And it's so simple. All we do is we take a patch cable and we connect the output of one side of that delay to the input of the other. And it's done like this. Our signal goes into the mono input, all right? Then we have the mono output. We take the signal from the mono output and we plug that into the stereo input, and then the stereo output gives us our two delays in series instead of parallel. I've always loved the sound of running delays into each other, okay? And with some of the multi-tap functions on this, you can get some great sounds. Just be aware that sometimes at higher settings, you can get oscillation and things, which can be a great sound. But yeah, it's something that if you use a stereo pedal, it can be great fun to play with. So one thing that can be a source of constant frustration, especially if you use vintage effects, is scratchy pots. So there's lots of different sorts of pots. Okay, you have dual gang pots, which you'll find in clones and clones, and they can be a little bit more open due to their design. Some pots come with little dust cover jackets to fit on them, but generally there'll be one or two openings in a pot where that air and dust can get in. Now the way a pot works is basically you've got this resistive film inside connected at either end, and that gives you your resistance, and in the middle you have what we call a wiper, and that basically drags across that resistive element, giving you a variable resistor. Now thankfully cleaning them is really simple. There's a product called Servisol, and we use what's called Servisol Super 10, which is what we call a switch cleaning lubricant, as opposed to something like the IPA 170, which is basically alcohol. Now, this cleaner leaves zero residue. So there are some things where you don't want to have any residue at all, but as far as switch cleaning and pot cleaning is concerned, Servisol Super 10, it's industry standard, and it's fantastic. I've been using this for forever. So all we do, using the little pipe that comes with the can of Super 10, we direct our switch cleaner into the opening in the pot. We give it a spray and then move the pot around. This is also great for cleaning your pickup selector in your guitar, which is often more open than pots are generally. So just getting in there, quick squirt with this stuff, move your selector back and forward, and that'll clean all the rubbish right out. So for the last one, I'm going to show you something that I've been using to connect my stereo pedals to TRS connections. That's what I call the TRS stereo connection hack. So if you play in stereo, you'll have a left and right out of the pedal. There are some connections though that use a TRS input. So if you play in stereo using a wetter box, it has a TRS input. Some switching systems to use stereo have TRS inputs. So that would mean you would have to go from two mono outputs and then sum them to a TRS jack to go to the socket. However, there is a much easier way to do this. Now this will require the use of a soldering iron, but what this means is if we're taking the stereo pedal to a TRS input, we don't need the use of adapter cables anymore. They can get kind of messy and cumbersome. We can use a simple TRS connector from our stereo pedal to the stereo input. So we're going to go back and have a look at our TRS connector. Okay, so remember we're talking about we have our TRS, our tip, our ring, and our sleeve. Okay, but the other side of that connector, we have these three other tabs here. And what happens is when the jack isn't plugged in, these connections make contact. But as soon as the jack is plugged in, the tabs are connected to the top of the jack, and that connection lifts these tabs away from the other side of the connector. So with the jack plugged in, the connection between this tab and this tab is broken. With the jack pulled out, then that connection is made again. And we're going to use this connection, these tabs that connect to the other side, to do our TRS stereo hack. So if you can imagine, we have our two outputs, okay? we have a left output and a right output, and there are different signals on the left and right output, and that gives us our stereo imaging. But what we want to do is, instead of using two mono cables from the output of our stereo pedal and using adapters to go to the TRS input, we want to be able to plug in our TRS connector to our stereo pedal and plug that directly into the TRS input on our stereo input. So here we have our two mono feeds, okay, going to our two mono cables. But when we undo the jack plug, that tip terminal is now connected again to the other side of the switch. So all we need to do is take the switch side of the mono output and connect that to the ring side of our stereo output. Now what's happening here? If we leave our mono jack unplugged, that socket, the signal from our socket, will travel through the normal side, it will go to the switch side, and then go across to the ring side of the stereo output. So now, when I connect our TRS socket, we have both left and right outputs connected to our TRS socket. So why am I using the stereo side to do this and not the mono side? Well, generally you could use the mono side and have the output from the stereo side go to the ring on the mono side. However, in some pedals they use a clever like jack plug detection circuit that knows when a plug has been plugged into the stereo socket. Without that plug in the stereo socket, it will send both left and right summed together to the mono output. But as soon as it sees a jack plugged into the stereo socket, it knows to separate them. Okay, and that's what we want. We want to separate it left and right to go to the tip and ring of our stereo socket. Now we take our TRS connector from our stereo pedal, plug it into our stereo input that uses TRS, and we have a simple, elegant solution to get our stereo signals from a pedal to the input. Okay, a quick Dan disclaimer. If you take the back off your brand new shiny stereo delay pedal and you start soldering wires and things in there, you're going to void your warranty. Right? Mod any new pedal and your warranty's done. You know, my time factor is over 10 years old, but it's a really simple mod and I know what I'm doing, so it's, you know, I will do that to all my stereo pedals. I would say to any manufacturers out there making stereo pedals, just include this link. The TRS stereo connection is becoming really popular, like with switching systems and mixers and things. And also, when you plug your mono cables in, it works exactly the same as normal. As soon as you plug your mono cable into the mono out, it breaks that connection. So yeah, manufacturers, include that link, make us all happy. Now obviously this is a mod for those who are comfortable to solder. So yeah, maybe for those a little bit more experienced. I didn't really want to include any mods that included soldering, but you know, for those guys who are using stereo and who are using TRS connections with their stereo pedals, it's a great thing to be able to do. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. I hope that made sense. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. But have a fantastic day and we'll see you soon. Bye.